Just an initial question from me. It's been discussed or asked in a certain sense already today. From how many of you, if you hold a DOA, have contacted your DOA team leader and start planning the activities to integrate the amendment to Part 21? Good. It would be really good if suppose you would be here in 1 month's time and I ask the same question again, all hands go up. We've already said, yes, we have an implementation period, which is really nice, it's comfortable, but it only runs until March 2020. There's still a lot of work to be done. So at least please try to involve your DOA team leader at an early stage, get the contact going, get talking about this implementation of the amendment. Things do not have to be set in stone today, but get the conversation going so that we give ourselves every chance of success of reaching a correct implementation of this amendment before the applicability date 23rd of March 2020. Yeah. So in this presentation I will be focusing on more on the DOA related aspects to the change in Part 21, but like I said, all of the other subparts feature in that and the way we deal with it. So this is the topic, these are the topics that I'm going to be talking about. How are you affected by the new LOI concept? What about those new privileges where you can do certain major changes, major repairs or SDCs? We have deleted the TC4 privilege, traditionally called the AFM privilege. We have changes in the approval of the technical content is approved under the DOA number such and such. We need to update the terms of approval as a consequence of all the changes. And the question has been asked many times. We'll still review in detail on when is a significant change to the design assurance system needed. Level of involvement and how does it impact the design organization? So it has an impact on the applications you're doing to the agency. There are consequences on the design assurance system that need to be taken into account. You need to update your design assurance system to embed the new requirements with regards to LOI. They go into the procedures, and we need to talk about DOA performance measurement. I already touched on that this morning. This is a slide you've seen before. So who's affected? You are affected if you have a DOA, but also a DOA. I will only say this once actually. I'll keep talking about DOA, but most aspects can be done by analogy and apply to ADOA, where the ADOA is for STC or TC. So ETSO, separate story, discussed before our break, but for the TC or STC ADOAs amongst you, many requirements apply by analogy. Yeah. So where it's affected, on those topics that are in the upper part of the diagram. So for new TC or RTC, a major change that to major repair, STC, and APU ETSO, right? So APU ETSO, for those who don't know it, basically the APU is treated like any other engine, like a product almost. All requirements outside of subpart O apply. Apart from at the end, we issue an ETSO approval. So that's why we always make this distinction about the particularities of the APU. They are normally treated as any other engine. It does not apply to, and that was mentioned again today, to those DOAs that only do minor changes or minor repairs, or the other ETSOs as just discussed before the break. Yeah. So if you have a DOA only having in the scope minor changes, minor repairs, one of which or both, there's no need to do anything on level of involvement. So what are the consequences on the design assurance system? If you're doing TC, STC, major change, major repair, you need to apply. Apply with a Form 82 for significant change if you haven't done already. Anybody applied already with a Form 82? I could repeat my story 1 month from now I ask the same question. All hands go up. Let's get started on making this a success. And of course, this application shall include the elements that are needed for LOI implementation into the procedures. So normally it's your responsibility to determine whether a change in, for instance, in the regulation, but a change in general to your design assurance system is significant or not. In this case, we sort of predetermined it for you. The reason for that is it is a change in principles of the procedures. What is really a change in the principle and the procedures is when responsibilities start to change. We make you now responsible for doing the risk analysis, determining the level of involvement that you propose that to the agency, and we see that as a change in the principles of the procedures. If you look at 247, that's about significant change. The guidance material there too says in one of the first elements, a change in principles to the procedures. So that's why we want to be very clear about it. Don't make any fuss about it. It is a significant change. I think you know that you don't pay for a significant change other than the time invested, but at the end of the process you also get our buy-in to your procedures. We have had that conversation and you know that they comply with Part 21. And for us it's deemed important enough to make sure we do it correctly. So all of these things were discussed lengthily actually here in the building, and this determination was made. Again, a repeat, minor change, minor repair, only DOA, nothing to do for you. There's no need to update your procedures for the LOI side of the amendment. It was asked this morning, do you now expect us to do a risk analysis on minor changes? No, we don't expect it, but there might be good elements whilst you're implementing, especially for those companies that do both, like for instance SDC, but also minor changes, that you see some elements in there that you can put to good use into your minor change system. Why not upgrade your system? Yeah, but it's left to you. We are not forcing you to do anything on the minor change process based on the LOI. There's some elements in the Part 21 amendment that are going to be needed in the minor change process, but not the LOI aspect. Just a quick overview of what you need to look for when you start looking at your procedures and where do we need to make updates. So, DOA procedures should clearly address the following. Process for breakdown of the CP into meaningful groups, or CDIs as we call them in the AMC material. Make sure the breakdown is complete. It's a particular point for the DOA team leader to look at, okay, how do you ensure in your procedures that we have a complete coverage of the CDIs over the compliance checklist, basically. Criteria applied when CDIs cover more than one panel is a particularity. Proposal for the risk assessment. How are you going to do the risk assessment and how do you demonstrate and how do you put that in your certification plan or in your certification plan package? The risk assessment is one part of the story. It's not complete yet. From the risk assessment, you need to propose our level of involvement concretely. We think EASA needs to look at this document. We think you need to look at this data, or we think you need to witness this test, but maybe also the other way around. We don't think it's necessary on this, this, and that, based on the risk assessment that you performed. A lot of talk already on DOA performance and where does the number come from, or the score you got from us. It is within the dashboard, but for those companies that have limited activity, maybe if you do one SDC a year, your next SDC may not feature a panel level or a panel indicator in your new SDC. It might be something that was not touched on before, so there might be no feedback data available through the dashboard. In that case, we use the overall assessment of the DOA. So still the certification aspect, it was the red dot in the diagram, but we use the overall in the absence of a panel indicator. Again, there, a little bit of flexibility. We normally want you to take this figure, but if you really think it doesn't do you just, or maybe the other way around, you say, well, this is actually something new for us. We know we've got it in our DOA, but our experience is limited. Why don't we rate ourselves at medium? There's nothing against that. Yeah. Consideration of the attachments to the CM on LOI. There's good material in there. Of course, it's at certification memorandum level. It's not hard law, but there's very good material in there. So the expectancy is, of course, that you use that in your procedures and ultimately in the proposal you make to the agency. And then, of course, how do you interface? Within the project, how does the CP get sent? How does it get updated? How do you communicate about that? All of that should feature in your procedures. It wasn't touched on this morning. I expected some questions, but there were none. I will trigger maybe a few now. I don't know. We'll see. But we are upgrading the system for performance measurement. We're still working on it. We have at the moment published a new DOA dashboard. I don't think many of you will have seen it yet. We generally discuss the dashboard at the annual meeting with the DOAs. And we present the data that we have from the projects, but also from the audits, and give the overall figure. This new dashboard captures especially the feedback you get from the DOA team leader and the DOA team in the assessment, mainly during audits, but it might also be at desk audits or other data that have been reviewed that go into the equation that gives us the final number. On the feedback from certification, there's no difference yet. We are working on a better system. But at the moment I can't give you a fixed date on that, on when we have the better system of capturing feedback data from the certification projects themselves. That is in the making. We're looking at things like, can it be done by SAPIAC? Will it feature in there? It would also give you better access to the data, the scoring we do per project, etc. Remember, you need an MOU signed for that. But it's still work in progress. We try to do better. Also, this for us is a journey where we try to do better, and some hiccups we had in the gathering of the feedback data and the scoring that is done. There's room for improvement there. It's been recognized, and we're working on that. What you will also see at the moment, it is a possibility in the dashboard, but is not used yet, is a tab or is data concerning continued awareness. We don't have the system yet on gathering feedback on continued awareness. So with continued awareness, I don't mean ICAs, I mean 21A3 type stuff. So potential unsafe conditions and how does a DOA deal with them. We want that to feature as well in the scoring of the DOA and will be made visible through the dashboard. That's all in the making. Any particular questions on the dashboard or the feedback data? Somebody needs a microphone.
Is the dashboard available for everybody, so that everybody can see that our DOA is at a minimum, maximum level or medium level, or is it only visible for us?
We are not publishing the dashboard. What you do with it, you get a copy, of course. You have a right to know how we score you, of course, when we have a discussion on that. But of course, we don't publish any company's data ever to anybody. Yes, it's been brought up that that it might be useful for some to also to know what your competition has, etc. But also where does your scoring relate to an overall score? Yes, but we are very cautious with providing access to data that belongs to another company. So at the moment, not by us. Whether you put it on your website.
You mentioned the MOU. Could you explain a bit more about that?
So the MOU is what I mentioned this morning. The feedback data is provided to you automatically at the annual meeting in a summarized way? Do you want to know exactly what the feedback data was for a particular project from the PCM, from the whole team, from all the experts involved? That data is available to you, but it needs to be done under the MOU as a document that is signed by your head of design, by our head of design organizations department, that basically says, yes, we will use this only for the good intentions to improve, to learn, to do better, and not the flip side of that would be to call the expert or call the PCM and say, why did you give us a low score? We think it should be high, and a discussion on that case. It should be taken as fact, to be taken into the future where you improve your organization and we together improve the way we work together. Any other question on the dashboard? Christian. Be careful, I'm your DOA team leader.
Yeah, I experienced that. What I didn't get is, in order to establish the LOI, I need to sign the MOU to get all the performance of each panel.
No. So you get the dashboard, and within the dashboard is summarized data, so an average of over the projects you have done in the year for all panels, including PCM, okay, and an overall score. If you want to know for a particular SDC, in your case, what was the scoring by the avionics expert, you need to have a signed MOU in place.
Okay, so the annual dashboard is sufficient.
It's sufficient to do the LOI, of course. Okay. Otherwise, yeah, it would be strange to force you to sign an MOU. No, that's not necessary. But thanks for clearing that up. All right. Some other elements that we need to talk about. This one is related mainly to the LOI. Before we were doing LOI, it was this privilege that all of you have in your terms of approval, the B privilege, coming from 263B, where we say we accept without further verification compliance documents for the purpose of, and the list is the majors, the ETSO authorization under point such and such, so APU, and the approval of flight conditions. But we were still reviewing documents. We used 21A257, where we say, well, we can review any document. Yeah. There was always a lot of discussion around this topic. It's now been replaced by LOI. Yeah. So LOI is the, let's say, the more modern way, the more risk-based way on how we deal with you and what we want to review, want to retain, and what we feel the DOA can do under their own responsibility directly under their approval. So therefore there was no need for this particular bit of the requirement of the privileges anymore. You may ask, well, for the approval of flight conditions, we can't see that on the LOI topic because LOI is not required for flight conditions. But we do feel that we have sufficient information in there in means in 257 to review documents anyway on the permit to fly. Yeah, so for a permit to fly is not replaced by LOI. The privilege has been deleted, but the way of working will be exactly the same. And do interrupt me at any time if you have a question. I don't, yeah. As I just explained. On to the new privilege. Again, a question from me. Who is thinking about applying for one of the new privileges? So, meaning a major change. Major change can be to an STC or to a TC. A major repair. For those that do not already hold a major repair as TC holder or STC holder, directly on the certificates held for that, or the one for the STCs. Anybody? I'm just counting how much applications we need to resource this thing. So, yeah. Okay. I hope the following material is useful for you then. Yeah. What it does say very clearly, and between the quotes there, it is only applicable for certain major changes. Basics is, it is those type of changes, and now I will keep talking about changes. It's such a mouthful to say STCs or repair. So those changes that it does not make sense for us because we've seen that the risk is low, it does not make sense for us to review. We know the DOA, we know how you're working. There's enough material there, it's not critical, and there's some aspects around that, or some requirements around that, what describe the word certain. And we know that the risk is low, and you can do it by yourself. And yes, it does mean that you have the potential of issuing your own STC, or issuing your own major change, or issuing your own major repair, also on foreign projects. So not necessarily on your own TC or on your own STC. Let's look at the detail. This is the bit of 263 that in the case of C5 has been changed to say now certain major repairs. 8 and 9 have been added. So 8 is to approve certain major changes to a type certificate under subpart D, and 9 is the one for SDCs under subpart E. And we'll look at how that is supposed to be done. It's always good if you know what is coming in your presentation. That was the highlight that I wanted to highlight. With this material, with this requirement, 3 elements in the AMC guidance material have been provided to you. AMC number 1 to all of the 3 privileges, AMC number 2 and the guidance material. AMC 1 explains the scope, says something about what does the word certain mean and how do we use that. And it explains the criteria for limitation and eligibility of this new privilege. AMC 2 describes the process. How do you get as a DOA your initial privilege in your terms of approval, and how then do you extend the privilege? You can have one type of project in there, but maybe 2 years later you want to add another and another and another. So we fill up this privilege with certain projects that can be done under this privilege. And we'll look at the process. The guidance material itself proposes a numbering system. We cannot go further than proposing a numbering system, but within the industry, also you have to look at the recipient. It would be really good to see that everybody numbers their STCs done under privilege in a similar way so everybody can recognize them. We know that they are done in a certain way under a certain system, and that's why we feel it's beneficial to do it in that way. You also need to send some data to the agency. You still need to know about your use of the privilege. It's all new. So, sorry.
I have several questions regarding approval of the major changes or STCs by the design organization. First question, that privilege, does it apply to non-European design organizations as well? Is there any distinction between European or non-European design organizations?
Yes and no. So in your case, since you're already on a DOA that has STCs in the scope, I think it would be available to you. But as a general policy for new companies applying for DOA from outside the EU or outside the states that also have signed up to EASA, so Switzerland, Norway, etc., we only accept now applications for DOA for only doing minor changes, minor repairs as a policy.
When we talk about STC, that means we are issuing this certificate, the paper itself as well, right? Do we have a standard?
Yeah, whether you do that in the yes, basically yes. You issue your own approval.
Yes.
I wouldn't necessarily call it a certificate.
Okay. Then, I mean, is there any standard template for any other AS-approved design organization?
Yes. We'll get to some of the detail. I don't know if that part of the detail is there, but we have already published on our website under the DOA page. We have published templates, and it goes along with the numbering system. So we have standard templates that could be used. It's guidance material, so but we urge everybody to use it so that also on the recipient side people recognize it. People recognize it as, okay, this is an SDC, it's done under a certain system, etc. I think it's beneficial for everybody, and it's been published on the website. So there's 3 approval forms suggested on the website for one of each for the privileges.
Perfect, thank you. Another question, do we still have to pay for the fee? Do we submit the SDC application on the system?
No.
On the EASA portal? No,
No.
in this case. If we have the privilege, we don't submit anything, we don't pay the fee.
In that sense, it's the same as you do your minor change today.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks for your question. I'm not through with the presentation yet on the privileges, but
Will SDCs that are issued by a DOA holder be recognized under bilateral agreements?
yes, but it's more a question for Ralph, but yes, it's the
Well,
quick answer.
Not automatically. So the process is the same as if you would have not the privilege. So finally you have to apply for the FAA validation. You do this through EASA. And by this we have to check as well. Okay, it is already approved. Nevertheless, before we forward this to the FAA, we will have a short check. If we agree everything as it is, we forward it to the FAA validation part, and then we follow just the BARTHA, the tip. If we would have a question and say, well, this is not in line what we would have expected, we're still allowed to ask back questions before we forward this to FAA, just in case.
Let's continue. So on the major repairs, there's 2 aspects on major repairs. The first one is for major repairs done by the SDC holder. So the TC holder or the SDC holder designing repairs to the product or to the change to the product they have designed themselves. Yeah, your own SDC or your own TC. This privilege already existed as C5, but now it carries the word certain. First of all, it will be dealt with as an administrative change, basically. Yeah, so there will not be a big investigation to this. The terms of approval will just get updated for this, and there's no need for a significant change application from those that already hold today the C5 privilege. There are some limitations on the use of the privilege. They were there before as well, but they have been highlighted now a lot better through the AMC material. And I think they make sense. I don't think it happens that often. You must be really into a corner and you can't do anything else with this aircraft. But to use these options, so whenever you want to approve a major repair, but you basically need to interpret the certification basis in a different way, I think it also makes sense that you can only do that when we are in the boat, when we are also reviewing this and agreeing this with you, because it's actually a change of the certification basis. Also, the application of a CS that is different from the ones used for type certification is in a similar fashion. It has to do with the certification basis. Basically, you are modifying the certification basis for this repair. It's very rare cases. I personally haven't seen one ever. It might happen. So, but these are the limitations on the use of the privilege by the TC or SDC holder. What is new is that now a non-TC holder, a non-SDC holder, in the sense of you can do a major repair to a foreign product, not your own product or not your own SDC, but only in certain cases. So conditions are the same as for major change, and we'll talk about them when we get there, but it's important to understand that there's various limitations on the use of the privilege. Basically, we'll deal with changes in SDCs in a similar fashion. So the criteria are the same. Again, the word certain is incredibly important here. It's not a carte blanche to do any STC you want, to do any major change you want. It needs to be under strict control, and we need to know about the type of project. And how we're doing that will follow. So we're talking about changes that are similar to those that have been previously approved by EASA for the same DOA holder. So we already know basically the project. We know the type of change, we know the certification basis, we know the demonstration of compliance, etc., etc. We are very familiar for that. It meets the eligibility criteria, we'll get to that. There's a few boxes coming up, but there are some conditions under which it becomes a possibility. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. These are those. So when is it not eligible? Let's start with that. So if it needs a revision of the TCDS, you can't revise the TCDS, only we can do that. So it needs an application for sure. Yeah. If the certification basis needs to be amended, you can't amend the certification basis, needs to be done by the agency, therefore we need an application. Revision of ALS or OPS limitations basically prevents it. We can discuss in some very particular cases, we may agree that it can be done. Change is triggered by an AD, terminating action to an AD, we need to be involved. I think that's logical as well, so they are excluded. Also, when you want to do an alt-mock to an AD, in a similar fashion, we need to be aware of it, we need to be approving that. Major changes, STC not eligible for a privilege, continued. Any significant change, according to 21A 101. Anything that's significant, we need to be, you need to be applying to the agency. More conservative requirements are applicable compared to the reference change. So you're deviating from the project that we know of, that you have been used to demonstrate that you can hold the privilege. So with that deviation, it sort of invalidates that privilege for the particular project, and you need to apply for it. Any noise or emissions characteristics are affected. Again, there's the asterisk. In some particular cases, we may agree that it still can be done under privilege, but only in very rare, limited cases. Any change to critical characteristics of the system featuring single failures with catastrophic effects. I think again, we're managing risk here. This presents a risk, it's an inherent risk of the change, and we want to be involved in that, so you need to apply for those as well. Particular case for engine and propellers, of course, there's the level is one step lower, so for the engine and propellers it's for hazardous effects. And the last one, if a non-compliance is found in the reference change during the continued awareness process. Yeah, so you've done a reference project, it led to a non-compliance, there might even have been an unsafe condition. Of course, I think it's logical as well, we don't want you to do this, the follow-on project under the privilege. The principles. So this is from the start to the end, which results in an approved change in a nutshell. We start out with reference projects. Reference projects are those projects you have applied for to the agency. You've demonstrated, first of all, them compliant. You have the approvals, the approval forms are there. You also demonstrated that you're capable of doing it, and capability also in terms of DOA performance. You apply for the privilege. Yeah, so that's a Form 82 that gets sent to EASA and is processed by the DOA team leader. With the application, you submit your procedures on how you're going to deal with this privilege. And within that, you describe the changes for which the privilege is sought. You have the reference projects. With that, you demonstrate on the basis of the reference project similarity with those that are already done, being the reference project. You demonstrate that the certification process basically is repetitive. There's no new features that are coming in through the new projects. You demonstrate good performance, or if you have demonstrated good performance during the application for the reference projects. And there's a low LOI likelihood during the last reference project. Yeah, so there's a low likelihood. Again, we're managing risk here. We only want to do these things in the case of low likelihood. Otherwise, we need to be involved. And like I said, all of this needs to be described in the procedures of your design assurance system. If you do that successfully, you will get an update of your terms of approval that now lists the privilege, but it also will list in the limitations section a reference to a document you will create that says this is the list associated with the privilege. So within this document you identify, and we agree with that, the projects that are eligible for being done under the privilege. Once we have all of that established, you can go ahead and do your first project under privilege and approve it until the very end without involvement of the agency. We will still always be involved through our DOA audits. That was also discussed this morning already. We will of course look at that like we sample your minor changes. I think you will understand we want to sample your major changes as well. Yeah. So through the DOA surveillance, we still want to assure ourselves that you're doing the right thing, that what you set in your procedures you're doing in practice, that the eligibility criteria are always fulfilled, no mistakes are being made, and yeah, that's the purpose of the surveillance. A word on the reference project. We have set a minimum of reference projects, and this is 1. Yeah, you can go to the bare minimum. We at least need 1. Yeah.
Well, I think this depends on the kind of project and of performance, if it's 1 or maybe more than 1.
So, the minimum is 1. You have to, of course, do everything right on that 1. Yeah. It can be a process where you slowly build up not only your expertise on the particular type of project, but also our knowledge of seeing you do that and seeing progress until a point where everybody feels comfortable that it is a low risk project now and it can be done under privilege. But the more reference projects you do, ultimately you will not create new projects because you ran out of customers basically, right? So you always have to balance, is the privilege worth the effort? Do I foresee for this particular project, this particular installation, do I foresee enough projects coming to invest in a privilege? That will have to be your own decision. Any questions? Fred.
At the beginning,
people as well. Huh?
ladies first. At the beginning, let's assume we have 1, 2, 3 STCs, and we define a work scope. And later, we have another STC with different work scope. Does it mean every time we have a new STC with different work scope, we will have a significant change application to EASA to get the privilege introduced in the work scope, in the terms of approval somehow?
So I will get to some of those details later on with some flowcharts, but the principle is you apply only once with a significant change to get the privilege in your terms of approval.
Okay.
With that comes at least 1 project. The reference list cannot be empty. We have to see 1 project that you actually demonstrate your capability on. To expand then that list with further projects, it is a more direct communication with the DOA team leader. We still need to accept it, but we don't want to make a full significant change out of it. Yeah, so it's one level lower, but it has to be done by an acceptance of the DOA team leader.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we have some internal processes on that, on how to deal with it.
Maybe if I add, you will have a procedure, and this procedure includes a list of associated major changes privileged. And this list will be extended. Or you have already at the first instance a kind of family of changes which covers all this what you could assume in the future for this kind of changes. But if you go beyond this family of this envelope, then you have to ask again. So you have the privilege, you get the privilege, it's once, but to extend the list you have then to ask again the EASA and the team is the DOA team leader, the PCM and the involved experts in that.
But also you need another reference project. Yeah. So again, the first application of that type of project has a minimum one, on the basis of which we can accept the extension of that list.
Was another question?
Hello. We wanted to ask if we, as a DOA or DO, issue an STC, will it be recognized in the same manner by any foreign agency for validation purpose?
So if I understand the question, it was quite similar to the one before. The question was if it's automatically validated by another authority than EASA?
At least accepted in the same manner.
Yeah, so for the acceptance by another authority, we have to work according to the bilateral in place. So in the case of Transport Canada, FAA, ANAC, Brazil. And for all the other cases, it would be complete new certification. So no, this works parallel to Part-21, and therefore this is not automatically accepted, at least not for the time being. It might be part in future tips where we have a bilateral, but at the moment it's not. So therefore you have to apply at EASA for the validation in the other authority, whichever it is, and we forward this then after our check if everything has done as it should be done according to your privilege.
Okay, thank you. But there will be no difference in the handling compared to an EASA STC.
So what
foreign agency?
What we've done
will be the same.
Yeah, we've informed our bilateral partners. They know about this. So if we talk bilateral, they know about this, and they will have to see it like any other STCs, whether it's EASA approved or DOA approved. But of course, since the application goes through EASA, we are not sending on any information without looking at it. Yeah, so that's the little caveat that's in there.
Thank you.
On one of your slides, you mentioned alt mark to an AD. What is the difference between alt mark and A mark?
2 letters. No, for me it's the same thing. It's the same thing.
So why are you introducing a new abbreviation? Because A mark is alternate method of compliance. Alt mark is alternate means of compliance that is used for the AMC. It's 2 different things.
Do you have an answer, Leo, for that? Because I don't.
I don't remember why we have to check.
Yeah, it might be that we intended it to read AMOC. But I think we need to record that question.
It says in the AMC means and not method. So it's 2 different things, and I think AMOC is known in the industry.
I understand your question. I just don't have an answer for you at the moment. I'm just looking at my colleague if he quickly can find out, and otherwise we'll record it and publish it as part of the overall question and answers.
It's only make things complicated.
We'll make every attempt to do it during this session, so today or tomorrow, and otherwise it will be answered later.
I remember that there is a difference.
There is,
we will provide, but I don't want to say anything wrong now, so we will provide this tomorrow, the exact answer, but there is a difference.
If an DOA obtains this privilege and an STC has to be approved by the DOA. The question is, has the DOA inform EASA if they start with this project, or is it handled like a minor change then?
It's not quite. You need to inform us when you have closed the project.
Pardon me?
You need to inform us when you have closed the project, not when you start the project.
Okay.
And of course it will be discussed, and we will look at your list of your projects like we always do during the annual meeting, and of course the ones done under major privilege will also be reviewed. Here in the front, Ralph.
Will those self-approved STCs also be present in this STC list published on the EASA site?
Leo, do you have an answer?
Yes, that's the reason why you have to provide it to us, actually. Otherwise you don't have to. You have the privilege. It's part of your associated list inside your procedure. You have a justification document explaining all this, all the envelope, everything, so that the whole certification process is identical to your reference projects, or at least covered by these. And then you can do it completely under your privilege as you do it for minor changes. So you send this to us for the reason that we publish it on our website, so that the public is aware of, okay, this is an approved STC under the DOA privilege, actually, not by us. But yes, that's the point.
Thank you. We currently hold the privilege to approve major repairs to our own STCs. You said for us it will be rather an administrative change, the certain major repairs. Right. But if I look at that slide, before we approve a certain major repair, we would have to do all this. So,
two processes. The first one is in the category you're dealing with. Are you a TC holder or STC holder? Sorry, STC. So you have the privilege to do repairs to your own STCs. So for those aspects, we will treat it as an administrative change, which is basically the update of the terms of approval. You need to, of course, assure yourself that the two exceptions are embedded in your procedures, but you have to do that under your own responsibility. We'll look at it during surveillance. What we will do when we look at things, etc., there's a slide all the way at the end, so I'll explain a little bit more on that. However, if you want to now also use the C5 privilege to approve major repairs under privilege on products you do not, or you are not the TC holder of, or you are not the STC holder of, then you need to go through this process as well. So yeah, there's a clear distinction in this privilege. Yeah, we could have opted to create a new privilege. We didn't. We embedded it into one major repair privilege. Yeah.
So I assume when one of these DOAs issues an STC, it will get published on the EASA website, or at least the number and identification information will be published on the EASA website like all other STCs?
Yes.
Okay. Just a quick question. Can this be done concurrently with the first major repair or STC application? So can you apply for your first STC at the same time as you write and incorporate this privilege into your procedures?
So formally no. So you have to have a reference project completed with success. It would be greatly appreciated, of course, if you set out to do this, that you inform your DOA team leader, this is now our first project. We have every intent of making this into a privilege so that we're all aware of it and can anticipate and already take some initial steps.
Ralph, can you maybe highlight, you mentioned that at the end when, let's say, a new STC has been approved under the privilege, they should inform EASA. Could you maybe highlight to whom or who they have to inform?
Actually, the idea is that you inform the DOA team leader about it, so this is your point of contact, and provide this through the DOA team leader, then yeah, to EASA, and we will establish it into the list.
I will put it on the to-do list.
Does the reference SDCs need to be following the new LOI concept, or can it be historical SDCs that we already hold?
At least one of them, probably the latest one, has to be done under the new LOI principles. Yeah, we need that data coming from the risk analysis.
Yeah, so we have two criteria here: good performance during the last reference project, and the low LOI likelihood during the last reference project. And this data is needed. So without the new LOI approach, this data is not available. So this is a starting point. Maybe on a case-by-case basis, if you have just applied for something where it's not yet done, but the people are still aware of because it was just done a week ago, maybe we could think about it to do it retroactively, but usually the answer is no. You should have.
It would be very much the exception. Yeah, so get a reference project done under LOI. For those that used advanced implementation, we can look at those projects. There we need to see that enough elements are there for us to make the determination. Next slide. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, it's just...
I think many questions are already answered.
I think so too, yeah. So there's... But it's better that we answer your questions directly when they come up than that I say, yeah, it will be in some slides to come. So that's why we don't mind all the questions. And in fact, we welcome them. So conditions for issuing the privilege, and here we go already what we already discussed. Reference projects approved in the past needs to be there. Similarity, the project needs to be similar. The design, installation, operation, basically the same of the projects you are going to do on the project, on the privilege. And repetitiveness of the certification process. Nothing new in the certification process. Basically, you're repeating the same thing. Yeah. So, identical to or part of. Yeah. It can always be smaller. Of the approved reference project. You invent something new, a new demonstration of compliance, a different requirement that needs to be met out of the scope of the project and needs to be applied for. We do expect for the performance level medium or high. Go for high, please. And we need to have a low or very low likelihood of an unidentified non-compliance for all the groups of the compliance demonstration activity and data, meaning all the CDIs on which the risk analysis was performed needs to have a low or very low likelihood. Again, we're managing risk. If the likelihood is higher, we need to be part of the story, we need to be part of the project and reviewing at least some of your documents through an application.
I would like to concentrate a little bit on the
sure.
on even the slide before, on the repetitiveness, that really the certification process has to be identical to what we have seen before. So the same method of compliance, the same means of compliance. If you decide where I did before a flight test, now I will make a simulation, it's outside the envelope, you have to apply again for EASA. So really you do the same job as you did before, or maybe a sub-job of that, so which is still in the envelope as described in the justification document. Then it's another privilege. As soon as you go beyond this or you make it different, it's not another privilege.
Thank you, Ralph. Basically, we went through the chart. I mentioned this, I will repeat. So the process for issuing the privilege is you apply with a Form 82. You apply with a Form 82 for each privilege. If you have the desire to hold all three privileges, it means 3 Form 82s. We want to see that separately for each privilege. Provision, of course, of the related procedure or procedures. Establishing this list and an initial content of that list. We will not try and approve an empty privilege. Provision of the justification document, we'll get to that, but the justification document basically tells us that you as an applicant have looked at all the requirements, all the eligibility criteria, You've looked at your reference project and you came yourself to the conclusion, yes, this particular project is eligible to be done under privilege. We require a justification document from you where you spell out in detail and build the case basically for why this particular project can be on the list of projects associated with the privilege. And then we do the assessment. For sure the DOA team leader will not do it by themselves. They will seek the advice of PCMs and experts, particularly of course those that were part of the reference project. Yeah, so that will be an internal communication, might be questions coming back to you on the justification document contents or any data that we have available from the project. Might be just a clarification, but that's what we will look at in detail. When we're satisfied that you fulfill the requirements, we update in the initial case the terms of approval, add a new privilege in there, make reference in the limitation to this particular list, and then from there on forward extension can be done as explained by direct communication with the DOA team leader, no Form 82 necessary. Look at a bit of what the justification document needs to be all about. A reference to the changes or repairs used to demonstrate the experience and performance, reference projects, the certification program. Remember, it needs to be the same. Within at least the envelope, it can be smaller. Which types are we talking about? Which models are we talking about? We can talk about different types. It doesn't have to be within the type range, but of course there we have to be really careful about the certification basis. Also, when you do your reference project, you might want to anticipate this. You might want to look at what will my certification bases be and elect to comply with one that suits you best.
Maybe on this subject, please be aware we have a difference here with the FAA. We issue a CS 25, 27, whatever, as a book. So it's at a certain amendment. And then all paragraphs in this book are at the same amendment. So if I take CS 25, we're at amendment 3. This is applicable to each and any paragraph inside. For FAA, the amendment changes per the batch that is published by this amendment. So therefore, if you want to take credit for a type which is beyond the one you have applied in the past, take this into account, even if the paragraph might be the same wording, that you take really the paragraphs at the right amendment at the highest which you want to apply for this kind of change privileged by you.
This might get you into trouble as well, of course. If you want to apply 16G requirements to a 9G aircraft, rather difficult. Yeah, you won't be able to succeed. Yeah, so there's limits to this. But do spend some thought on your reference project or reference projects so that they will give you the maximum possibilities under the privilege.
Yes, exactly. And the related possible types and models must be listed inside this justification document. There might be exceptions where the types and models do not impact at all technically this kind of change. This is the exception. But if the type or model has an impact on this kind of STC major change, then it must be listed in the justification document. If it's not, you have to get it updated and sent again to EASA. Or you have to think about it from the beginning, and if it's included, it's part of it.
If we're not quite in the envelope, you need to tell us where you go beyond the envelope or what the details are. It could become a deal breaker if you go too far beyond, but we do have an option to tackle those differences. Detailed description of your project or projects, and talk about the envelope. What is my envelope? How do I describe my projects? What changes do I make to the aircraft, to the engine propeller? And how do I control that they are within this envelope? Anything else? Anything else that is necessary to make sure that we're dealing with low-risk projects here.
So
There's no need for the agency to be involved. That is ultimately what we're after. We don't want to spend our time on repetitive projects where we know you have the capability, where we know you can do the job. You have demonstrated us that you can do the job. So why would we spend time on it? That's the bottom line of this privilege. Yeah, so it's low-risk projects.
So in principle, everything what is in the certification program should be sufficient, plus the reference project by which you demonstrate your capability. And if you want to have not the same change, but maybe a family of changes, then you have to go beyond and explain on top of what is anyway already in your certification program.
Again, some words on the update. So once you have the privilege, you update the list associated with the privilege with our acceptance. That's the basic idea. We do not need to update the TOA. We do not need a Form 82. The TOA will generically list or provide a reference without issue number to the list associated with the privilege, a document number given to you, to the DOA team leader, for incorporation on the terms of approval, and that's it. And then we manage updates of the list outside of the TOA and without a significant change application, but with good communication. All of this is also detailed here in the flowchart based on the size of the text. I don't want to go through it. It basically covers what we've just been talking about. It's there for your reference when you receive the presentation. You can go through it, but it's also in the AMC material. In the AMC material, the flowchart is in portrait. I can tell you it was a challenge to get it in landscape. You get some weird lines going on. So that's why I don't want to go into detail of this, but the material is there for obtaining the privilege and extending the privilege.
Actually, these flowcharts are inside the AMC GM material.
Yeah.
So if you find some time tonight to look through it and you have additional questions, you're more than welcome to ask additional questions by tomorrow.
Thank you, Ralph. Speaking of that, maybe already, any questions on the privileges, the new privileges? I think so too. Where's Michael? Okay. To you. Okay, Dilek. Last chance.
Last one. If we have previously approved STCs and if we are introducing a major change to that previously approved STC, now in our procedures when we introduce LOI, then for the new major change we have to have LOI, right?
Yes.
We have to work on again the certification basis and yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you need to apply the new principles to that major change to your STC. Yes.
Then another question, can it be an example project for the privilege? Can it be used?
It can be an example project for the major change privilege.
Yes.
But not for the STC privilege.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yes. I think I do not expect a lot of people that are in the business of designing STCs to go for the major change privilege. I don't see a lot of major changes going on STCs. So to have a privilege on that, in my mind, doesn't make a lot of sense. That might be cases, but I think it would be exceptional.
Yeah, could you expound a bit on the effect on the ALS section? So if you've got, say, applying a structural repair to a fuselage that's got additional fatigue inspections on it, could that be considered one of these certain major repairs or not, given the fact the ALS isn't actually affected by it?
You have to be very careful to say whether something affects the ALS, yes or no. So whether it's the ICA that is affected or the ALS is affected. Is the ALS, however, affected? Basically, it excludes it from the privilege. There was the little asterisk. On very controlled cases, I would say, where we know exactly the consequences, etc., it can be a discussion with the agency. Yeah, but we have to look at it then in a case-by-case basis. The asterisk just tells you we didn't exclude it fully. Yeah, sticks there.
Yesterday I was talking to my colleague, and then when I was explaining what is new in Part 21, we came up with a question. When we have an example, when we have the privileges to approve the STC by ourselves, and okay, it is defined what is the work scope. We are defining CDIs to understand EASA level of involvement, and of course we will have some level of involvement by EASA for the first project. For the second project and following projects with the same work scope, we will come up with the same level of involvement. How are we going to handle that? Because in the compliance checklist, we will define EASA level of involvement because we will have the same criticality, novelty.
Okay. I think I understand your question. So the subsequent SDC that you would do under the privilege,
yes.
How do you deal with the level of involvement?
Yes.
So there's no level of involvement. So you have to mark it as such, and it's like doing a minor change, where our level of involvement is 0 as well. And so although you may want to analyze the subsequent project that you intend to do on the privilege to make sure it has the same conditions as the previous one. We went through the conditions under which the privilege can be applied, but LOI does not need to be established because we are simply not involved.
But we will still define the CDIs, right? No.
Not necessarily. What you do is make this check that it fulfills the criteria for the particular project on the list associated with the privilege. If that's the case, there's no CDI is for the risk assessment, and basically you already did that risk assessment with the first project or projects.
What you actually have to do is you have to go inside your justification document and check that the new change is fully covered by the justification document. If this is done, you approve it under your privilege, or first you have to declare compliance to yourself, but the level of involvement aspect has not to be considered. There is no level of involvement. You don't have to provide CDIs. If you wish it for your own process, you can, but it's not required. So there it's really a different process. Look into the justification document that your new change meets the requirements, the conditions of the justification document, and then you approve it under your privilege without LOI.
Thank you.
Don't know what's going on.
Where do you want to start? I think we started here, yes. No?
Yeah.
Any other question?
While we're sorting out our IT problems.
What have you done here?
Any other question?
Okay.
Not ask something that you already know, that you want your colleagues to know.
Okay, I think that now it's okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Leo. All right, if there's no further questions for the moment on the LOI implementation or the new privileges, we'll continue with the other items of my presentation just to see where we are. We've done LOI, we've done the major change privileges. We're now going to look at AFM privilege, and what's coming up is the changes in the approval of technical contents. How do we update the terms of approval, and when is a significant change to the design assurance system needed? So on to the AFM privilege. So the AFM privilege, traditionally under C4, has now been deleted in the new amendment, and it's now deemed to be covered by C1, C2. So no special treatment of the AFM anymore. A minor change to the AFM is just a minor change to type certificate, and basically it was the change to type certificate being either a change to type design or OSD, now has been expanded to also cover the change to the AFM. We still want to understand and know on a certain DOA's capability to change the AFM. So in the transition, we will take that into account. So if a DOA has the full C4 privilege currently on their terms of approval, so minor changes to AFM, we're just going to remove that privilege, and it's deemed to be covered then under C1 and C2, so classification and approval of the change to the AFM. However, we still have companies that have in a limitation to the C4 privilege the old documentary changes only. So if that's the case, we're going to keep that limitation. Yeah, it will be a limitation referring to C1 and C2, but we're going to keep that limitation as documentary only. And those that do not have the C4 privilege at the moment at all, we're going to make that into a limitation as well, that there's no changes possible to the AFM. We'll make the changes for you. And you will have your discussion with your DOA team leader on the plan on how to implement the amendment, and this is part of it, but we'll treat it as an administrative change, so there's no application for this necessary. The only application would be necessary if you are unhappy with the limitation. You want the limitation removed. It's just going to be a significant change necessary to move up from either from no limit or having documentary changes or minor changes embedded into the terms of approval.
Maybe a small add-on. So last time the question came up about what about the privilege to provide this sentence revision number XYZ to AFM is approved under the authority of DOA number. So this is gone as well, this privilege, and now it's part of the obligation that we mentioned already yesterday in 265. So the same sentence that you have to provide for the new application is applicable for the AFM and anything else, so for service bulletins and so on.
Supposedly that's on the next slide, but
oh, sorry,
we're trying to get things working again here.
Yeah, so each minor change is a minor change, independently if it's to an AFM or not. So therefore, the same sentence has to be provided by the DOA.
That's the one. Let's see. Oh yeah, now I've got that one. I think we're in business again. That's the one that Ralph meant, and that's the one I prepared in the slide. So yes, the statement, the specific statement that was in C4, referring to the document, the AFM, etc., has disappeared by virtue of the specific privilege having disappeared. So you will then have to use the normal statement for any minor change that you have as per 265H. Yeah, we'll get to that point, the transition of the C3 privilege to the obligation as per 265H, but that's the one that's going to be applicable for the AFM changes as well. Any questions on the AFM privilege? Yes, please. We need a microphone.
Before we had a separate classification of the change to OSD, the change to AFM, and the change to type design, which resulted in the overall classification of the change to type certificate. Does it make sense to still make this separate classification?
So ultimately, one project, one classification, one approval. That's the principle. The separation out for the OSD is buried in the history on the OSD change, and we're still looking at whether that's a sensible thing to have in the guidance material or not. It's there currently. You can still, but look at it like this: if you classify a change to type design, so suppose you're doing a cabin change, yeah, there might be some structural aspects to that, and you look at the structural aspects, and if you see them in isolation, you sort of make up your mind if that's major or minor. Yeah, so building blocks within a project can be major or minor if classified in isolation, but the overall classification is the highest of all of them. So if one of them is major, then the whole project becomes major. Yeah, so look at it like that. But there's no formal need for you to go this route through classifying them all separately and adding them up together. You can, in your procedures, you can explain how you do that.
Okay,
yeah?
thank you.
Any other question? Okay.
Thank you. This is Paul Hodson from Frequentia. So the form, the application form, and I can't remember the number now, is not necessary for any change, or is it just a minor change that you're allowing to be approved within DOA privilege?
Yeah, so there's no change in what you can do under the DOA. It's just a change that the C4 privilege doesn't exist anymore, and is now deemed to be embedded in C1 and C2. So under that privilege, you can approve minor changes to the AFM, or a minor change to type certificate that has a consequence on the AFM. Yeah. Any other change to the AFM that's deemed to be major, or a project, an overall project, as we just discovered, if you do an STC and there's a consequence on the AFM, it just is part of the overall application. If you do not have it within your privileges, so if you have either a limitation not to do minor changes to the AFM documentary only, or no privilege at all, then you can still, for a minor change to the AFM, apply according to the form 37, I think it is. Yeah.
Right. So the form still exists, so that would...
It definitely still exists, like forms exist to do minor changes to type design. Yeah. So that's still a possibility.
I think we are updating the application forms in the way, at least in the electronic form, that in future this will be just an application to minor change. So the AFM minor change application will disappear.
Any other questions on the AFM? Okay, then we move on to changes in the approval of technical contents, already touched on with the previous one. So point 263C3 was deleted, and it basically moved to 265H. The sentence is basically the same. So the sentence you put on documents you publish, but it was deemed that it never was so appropriate to have it as a privilege. We really want the output of a DOA to be visibly marked with an approval statement, and so it was deemed that it was better placed under the obligations. Yeah, so that was why the change was made. What you have to do in your DOA, we also have provided further guidance material to this obligation. 263C3 never had any guidance material, but we now publish guidance material on this privilege. And what you have to do in your DOA and in your DOA procedures, check that you're providing the right statement on the right documents. Yeah. So in that case, DOA procedures may need to be updated. Do they need to be updated where you really touch on the principles? We might consider it significant. I think for most DOAs it will not be significant, but please have a conversation with your DOA team leader whether or not that is necessary or not. Yeah, but analyze your procedures for the consequences, and we'll look at some details. So I hope this is readable. So this is what the guidance material 265A says. There's more guidance material, but we want to highlight this one. So it provides guidance for complying with the obligation of point 265H and addresses various aspects, etc. So what we'd like you to do is, in the first step, identify data and information. Yeah, we've seen with the lack of any guidance on 263C3, organizations putting the statement on compliance documents. There's no need to do that. We don't want to see the statement now anymore on those compliance documents. It was never the intent. It is the, look at it like this, you publish something outside of your DOA. So any document that stays within the confines of the DOA, like a certification report, a certification program, anything like that, please do not put the statement on that. Put the statement on documents you publish to the outside world. So outside the DOA, to a CAMA organization, 145, an operator, service bulletins, things like that. That's what we're thinking of, that need to bear this statement now as per the obligation. Yeah. So look at it in this step-by-step. This is our proposal, to look at it in a step-by-step approach. Identify what for you is this relevant data and information, service bulletins, manuals, OSD or OSD supplements, the AFM as already mentioned. As part of that, look at your drafting processes for those data. Also, do not forget about the subcontractors that you potentially are using to create such data. And if they are creating the data for you, for instance, manual supplements, I know some organizations do it like that. Make sure that the statement is embedded into that, at least in the release page of those manuals. And look at the approval process ultimately for those publications that you have created. Any question? There's a question on the right-hand side of the room. You have to raise your hand again, Peter. Thanks.
The guidance material states that the statements should not be placed on production drawings used by a production organization.
Correct.
But if you have a contract with an external production organization, should the statement not be placed on the production drawings? Because that's outside the DOA.
Yes, correct. Thanks for this question. So on the relationship you have with production organizations, the way to manage approved data, etc., is through the DOPO arrangement. So within the DOPO arrangement, you have the flexibility to discuss with the production organization on how you make the statement visible. Also, you have to dare to consider that it might not be approved at the first time you send data to the production organization for prototyping purposes. So we want you to, through the DOPO arrangement, take care of the approval status of the data you're sending them. And we say, okay, in that case, this statement is not applicable, and you have to find your own way of communicating that to the design or to the production organization. Sorry. Yeah. I think there was a question from you, Ditlak. Yeah. It's in the front.
We are using external laboratories as well for flammability or crashworthiness, and the test plans. Right now, we have that statement when we send the test plan outside to a third-party laboratory. Is it required?
Okay, I regret my words now, trying to help you by saying outside your design organization. Okay, so no, on the lab test plans, the statement should not appear. It is to those actually using the data as a result created at the when you close the project. So manuals, service bulletins, ICAs, the AFM, and there might be other documents that you put out to the outside world for the operator, the CAMO, the 145 to be used. Yeah, but as long as the data runs within the cycle, within the DOA, to create the necessary certification documents in this case, to help establish the demonstration of compliance, the statement does not appear on those documents. Yeah. Any other questions on privilege to obligation? All right. Update of the terms of approval. So there's a lot of reasons within this amendment to update the terms of approval. Of course, we've modified 263C drastically, or 263 in its entirety actually. So A and B have been deleted, C3 and C4 have been deleted, and there's a need to update the terms of approval for these cases. If you look at it like this, it is an administrative change. So we would do it without a Form 82. But again, contact your DOA team leader, look at it in the overall project of complying with this amendment, and we'll find an opportune time to do actually the terms of approval update. If it's only because of the only definite significant change we have is embedding LOI into the procedures. So when that is approved, for sure the terms of approval will be updated in that moment in time. But there might be specific cases within your company, so please discuss with your DOA team leader. If there is an unrelated change needing to happen in the terms of approval, for instance, you change the name of the company, or you change an element of the scope, you add new scope, or you remove certain amount of scope, which is described in the Annex A and B, unrelated to the Part-21 amendment. If that is the case, at that moment in time we approve that change, we will use the new format of the terms of approval. So we will go in the terms of approval to depicting the new privileges. And for C3 and C4, we need some assurance then that the procedures are compliant with Part-21. So we'll do that at that moment in time, making sure that you understood that the AFM privilege is now on the C1 and C2, and that the C3 privilege now is an obligation with the associated guidance material that the statement appears on the correct documents. Yeah. So bear in mind, if there's an unrelated change to the terms of approval, you still might get some questions from the DOA team leader on these two aspects.
At least who will trigger the change of the terms of approval? Will be that as an automatical procedure by EASA, or is it embedded in our change for next year? Who is starting this business? Because as I learned, something is a LOI, but there are several other items as well. And who is triggering that? Who is checking that? So that we don't have a trap on this in this area.
Yes, we'll be monitoring that closely, also overall over all the DOAs. But the trigger, if you do major changes or STCs or RTC holder, then the LOI change and the significant change will for sure trigger the update of the terms of approval. Yeah, but all the bits and pieces will be then merged in that, like I say, during the administrative change. So in that moment in time, that's one trigger. The other trigger is, as I just explained, an unrelated change will still trigger the update of the terms of approval, because LOI in essence does not have anything to do with the privileges. It's just that as a result of creating this system LOI in Part-21, there was no need anymore for 263A and B, so those will be deleted as a consequence. A third option, if you only do minor changes, minor repair, it is up to the DOA team leader. Yeah, the DOA team leader will make sure the terms of approval get updated at an opportune time. Still, if you have such a DOA only doing minor changes, minor repairs, have that conversation with the DOA team leader so that there's no surprises. Yeah, I've asked my DOAs directly in an email for an implementation plan of the amendment and started the discussion that way. Most of the other DOA team leaders have done so already as well. Yeah. So basically, It will always be triggered by us. It will happen. Yeah, if it's in the ideal case, it will be triggered by the application Form 82 for embedding LOI into the procedures. Yeah. As a result, the terms of approval look a bit different. I don't expect you to read this. It's for your reference once you get the presentation, but I'll take you through some changes that are on the right-hand side, and you will find them on the document once you get the presentation. So just because we changed a little bit of the wording in 251, we don't talk about scope of work anymore, we just simply talk about scope. The changes in 251, which is the rule that tells us that we have to create terms of approval, have been brought about by the introduction of CAPE 10, and some wording changes have there, and they have a consequence on the terms of approval. Already mentioned removal of the privileges, so they will still appear as a paragraph number, but it will state reserved. Yeah, so this mimicking how it is done in the rule. A is now listed as reserved, B is listed as reserved, so are C3 and C4. So those items still appear in the terms of approval, not to get confused about the numbering. Just don't want anybody to be confused about that. There's some rewording going on in the other privileges. For instance, like we discussed yesterday, the word certain is introduced in the C5 privileges for major repairs. We have, of course, the introduction of C8 and C9, the new privileges for major changes and STC, also discussed yesterday. And on the subsequent page, not depicted here, but in the obligation paragraph, paragraph 3 of the terms of approval, we will see the new obligation as per 265H. No changes due to the amendment are foreseen in Annex A and B. So Annex A is traditionally the scope of the DOA, technical fields versus type of project, minor repair, major change, major change, STC, and TCs are in there as well. And B we introduce for the scope for ETSO. Yeah, but there's no changes happening in those annexes due to the introduction of this amendment. Any questions on the terms of approval? Sure.
Yeah, I just have a question about the privilege to issue the conditions or approve the conditions for a permit to fly. Will those actually change, or is it just a wording change?
There's a slight wording change, but in essence they haven't changed.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Definitely touched upon on LOI and the change of the privileges. Just to give you an overview and take the opportunity for me that this table is actually a copy from a document that I produced for internal guidance to the DOA team leaders. Call it a policy, a DOA policy for the introduction of this amendment. So what we're doing is we're trying to harmonize our way of working, introducing this amendment, and I've written a policy to the DOA team leaders so we all work in the same way. Yeah. So there's harmonization as part of that, but also providing guidance to the DOA team leaders on how they should work and how we make this incorporation of the amendment a success, and especially also before the deadline of 23rd of March. So this table comes from that. So the DOA team leaders are also aware that we made the decision that for sure the introduction of LOI is a significant change. You can see that in the 4th row. So for TC holders, STC holders, it's a significant change. Minor only, of course not. There is no level of involvement. And for major repairs as well. The reference there is to the guidance material 247. So paragraph 3, the first bullet point, is why we deem it to be significant. That's the reference we use, and it is about a change in the principles of the procedures. Of course, the approval is required when the amendment shall apply. The shall apply date is 23rd of March 2020. should somebody here not be compliant, a finding will be raised. The consequence of the finding is as well, since you cannot produce a complete certification plan because the LOI elements are missing, we cannot process any application. Yeah. So I would say, to be avoided at all costs, let's lose the time effectively until that date. Get in touch with your DOA team leader. I said I would repeat it a couple of times. Make sure everybody's on the same page. Make sure internally in the company people understand that this is important, that this needs to happen before this date. Otherwise, it may impact your business. If we go through the list, of course, as mentioned yesterday as well, new privileges, of course, needs a significant change application, and we're expecting one for each. Yeah, we will not do one significant change privilege for 3 separate privileges, so one for each. Of course, there's no deadline. You can make up your mind in the future if it is something for your design organization to hold, and we can then start the process. Deletion of the related deletion related to the minor revisions of the AFM is no significant change. We treat it as an administrative change basically in the terms of approval. The note is on the next page. To have it readable, we had to put it on the next page. For the transfer of the privilege to the obligation may be significant for some. I expect for most it will not be significant, but we couldn't be sure, so that's why the note explains that for some where it's a drastic change needs to be made, it might be significant. Please have a discussion with your DOA team leader. Then there's various other elements. We haven't discussed many of them yet. We will do so in the next presentation. Touched upon was the reorganization of Part-21 in the sense of moving requirements from A to B, being more clear about what are the organization's requirements, what are EASA requirements. So no significant change necessary on those. Various improvements that we will highlight soon. We also do not see a reason for them to have any need for a significant change. Introduction of maintenance check flights, also no significant change. We'll get to that later on. And Cape 10 as well. Just to be clear on exactly when is a significant change applicable, for those of you doing majors, LOI will for sure trigger a significant change. That's the bottom line. The next page is just the notes, but I'll stick on this, on the previous page, the notes I have explained to you by my own words. But are there any questions on, is it a significant change or not? Or the relationship with the terms of approval? Peter, over there. All the way on this side.
Maybe I missed it, but how can a Cape 10 change being no significant change result in a change to the DOA?
Due to the introduction of Cape 10, like I said, like I explained for the word scope, we just use scope and not scope of work. Cape 10 introduced some wording changes, for instance in that case in 251, that have to be reflected in the terms of approval, but it's just wording changes. Yeah, we don't talk about traditionally on the environmental protection requirements. I can't remember the exact words, you will find them in the new terms of approval, but we changed some of the wording to cover the increased scope under the environmental protection requirements, now including particle matter and CO2. So because of that, the terms of approval are changed. Let's say the template of the terms of approval is changed. Yeah. Any other questions? In that case, thank you. On to the next presentation that I can continue, I think. Yeah.